You want to know the real reason humans scare the living shit out of most galactic species? Ambassador Cathrix clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among the Arxian. It's not their resilience, their adaptability, or even their infamous hold-my-beer moments. I leaned forward, my antennae twitching with curiosity. As the junior diplomatic attaché to the Unified Species Council, I'd heard plenty of human stories, most of them ranging from the improbable to the downright absurd. But Cathrix was different. He'd spent 20 cycles as the Arxian ambassador to Earth, and he never embellished. "Do tell," I prompted, taking a sip of fermented nectar. The ambassador's private lounge aboard the USC Resolution had the best view of Earth's orbital defense network, and I watched as another patrol of sleek human vessels passed beneath us. It's because they're probably the only species in known space who developed their military doctrine backwards. Cathrix waved one of his upper limbs dismissively. Every other race I know of started with defense and gradually developed offensive capabilities. Humans? They started with the concept of professional warriors and worked their way back to civilization. I must have looked confused because he continued. Think about it. Most species developed armies to protect their cities. Humans? They built cities to support their armies. Their entire history is backward. They didn't create weapons to defend their civilization. They created civilization to better organize their weapon-making. That's... I searched for the right word. Disturbing? Oh, it gets better. Cathrix chuckled, a sound like grinding stones that still made me wince even after 5 years of working with him. You know that famous human quote about rough men standing ready to do violence? The one they always trot out at diplomatic functions? I nodded. Every diplomatic corps member had heard it at least once. People sleep peacefully in their beds at night only because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf. Well, about 60 cycles ago, during first contact, the Dralid made the mistake of assuming it was just pretty words. Philosophical posturing. Cathrix's compound eyes gleamed. Want to hear what happened? The Dralid incident? But that's classified beyond my clearance level. Was classified, Cathrix corrected. And since you're taking over my position next cycle, you need to know. Pour us another round. I complied, watching as he settled his bulk more comfortably into the reinforced chair designed specifically for Arxian physiology. The Dralid, in their infinite wisdom, decided to test humanity's resolve. They weren't hostile, just curious in that deadly academic way of theirs. They picked a small human colony, Eden G7, on the outer rim. Minimal strategic value. Population of about 20,000. The Dralid announced they were conducting a social experiment and blockaded the colony. That's against at least 6 different USC treaties. 7, actually. But the Dralid had a theory. They believed that humans, being as individualistic as they are, wouldn't risk a major conflict over such a small, strategically insignificant colony. The Dralid hypothesized that humanity's aggressive rhetoric was mainly posturing, and that when faced with a real situation, they'd negotiate, compromise, or at worst impose economic sanctions. Cathrix paused to take a long drink. The Dralid had based this assessment on how other species handled similar situations. The Vorax, for instance, once abandoned an entire sector to avoid conflict. The Mirian Federation regularly sacrifices outer colonies to maintain peace with their neighbors. It's considered practical governance. So what happened? The humans spent exactly 6 hours attempting diplomatic resolution. 6 hours. Cathrix emphasized each word. When that failed, they didn't escalate gradually like the Dralid expected. There was no series of increasing warnings, no economic sanctions, no show of force. Instead, humanity simply mobilized. He gestured toward the Earth below. Within 12 hours, every human military vessel in a 50 light-year radius was moving toward Eden G7. Not just their navy. Civilian ships were being requisitioned and armed. Orbital defense platforms were being dismantled and converted into makeshift warships. The humans have a term for it. Beating plowshares into swords. The Dralid watched in fascination as an entire species shifted to war footing over a single small colony. Surely the Dralid withdrew when they saw that response? I asked. Oh no. Cathrix's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Arxian equivalent of a headshake. They were scientists after all. They wanted to see what would happen. The Dralid believed that humanity was bluffing, that this was an elaborate show of force. After all, no species would risk interstellar war over 20,000 colonists. He leaned forward. What the Dralid failed to understand was that for humans, it was never about the numbers. Never about strategic value or resources or any logical calculation of cost versus benefit. The humans had made a promise, not just to those colonists, but to all their people. The promise that if you're human, if you build your home under their flag, they will come for you. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter how far you are from Earth. Those rough men and women they're always talking about, they meant it literally. The Dralid fleet over Eden G7 consisted of 15 vessels. When the humans arrived, they brought 300. When the Dralid commander asked why such overwhelming force was necessary, the human admiral responded with a quote from their history. The purpose of a military operation is to kill people and break things. The faster you kill people and break things, the less people and things you have to kill and break. I felt my antennae droop. That's rather direct. That's humans for you. The entire battle lasted less than an hour. The Dralid didn't even have time to send their findings back to their homeworld. But here's the part that really scared the rest of the galaxy. When it was over, when the Dralid fleet was reduced to debris and the colony was secure, humanity didn't stop. They didn't declare victory and go home. Instead, they turned their fleet toward Dralid space. But the Dralid weren't at war with humanity. It was just a rogue scientific expedition. Exactly. Cathrix's voice dropped lower. But the humans didn't care. Their response was, and I quote, "If you touch one of ours, we touch all of yours." They proceeded to systematically disable every Dralid military installation in 3 sectors. Not destroy, disable. They weren't seeking revenge. They were making a point. He gestured to a passing human warship. The Dralid study, as it's now known in classified circles, proved something fascinating about humans. They don't think about military power the way other species do. For most of us, military force is a tool of state policy. For humans, it's more primal. They see it as a sacred trust between their civilization and its citizens. But that's irrational, I protested. You can't build foreign policy on emotional responses. That's exactly what the Dralid thought, and that's exactly why they miscalculated so badly. Cathrix finished his drink. You see, most species in the galaxy developed their military capabilities as their civilizations grew more complex. It was a gradual process. Tribal warriors became standing armies. Armies developed into defense forces. Defense forces evolved into modern military organizations. But humans? They did it backwards. You mentioned that before, I noted. What do you mean exactly? Human civilization didn't create warriors. Warriors created human civilization. Their earliest cities weren't built for trade or culture. They were built to support armies. Their first laws weren't about commerce or justice. They were about organizing military forces. Even their technology followed this pattern. They didn't develop metallurgy to make plows. They developed it to make swords. They didn't create mathematics for commerce. They created it to calculate ballistics. Cathrix pointed to Earth again. Look at their planet. Every major human city started as a military installation or fortress. Their roads weren't built for traders. They were built to move armies. Their first navies weren't for fishing or exploration. They were for war. Even their space program, which they loved to present as a peaceful scientific endeavor, was born out of military rivalry. But they've evolved beyond that, I argued. They're a modern civilization now. Are they? Cathrix's mandibles clicked in amusement. Look at their language, their metaphors. Everything they do is steeped in military terminology. They don't solve problems, they tackle them. They don't succeed, they conquer. They don't work hard, they battle through. Even their sports are basically ritualized warfare. He gestured at a datapad. And here's the really interesting part. Most species, as they develop civilization, try to distance themselves from their warrior past. They consider it primitive, something to evolve beyond. Humans? They celebrate it. They build their entire culture around it. Those rough men standing ready? They're not an unfortunate necessity for humans. They're the foundation of their entire society. But they're not constantly at war, I pointed out. They participate in diplomacy, trade, cultural exchange. Of course they do, Cathrix interrupted, because somewhere along the line, humans figured out something profound. The best way to honor their warrior heritage wasn't to fight constantly, but to build something worth fighting for. They turned their warrior ethos toward creation instead of destruction. But, and this is the crucial part, They never lost that fundamental warrior mindset. He leaned back in his chair. That's what makes humans so terrifying to other species. It's not their technology or their numbers or even their military capabilities. It's the fact that deep down, at their very core, they're still those rough men standing ready. Every human, from their diplomats to their merchants to their artists, carries that warrior heritage. They've just learned to express it differently. So when the Dralid challenged that heritage, they got a practical demonstration of what happens when you mistake human civilization for weakness. Cathrix's mandibles clicked in what I recognized as his equivalent of a grim smile. The Dralid thought they were dealing with a normal spacefaring species that had developed military capabilities. What they actually encountered was a warrior species that had developed civilization. I watched another human patrol pass below us, their ships moving with practiced precision. Is that why we maintain such a large diplomatic presence around Earth? Partially, Cathrix admitted. But mostly it's because humans are the galaxy's best deterrent against large-scale warfare. Not because of their military power, though that's considerable, but because of what they represent. Every species in known space has seen the recordings of the Dralid incident. They've all read the reports. They all know that if they start a war, they're not just facing an enemy's military. They're facing a species that built its entire civilization around the art of warfare, then chose peace anyway. He gestured to the Earth once more. That's the real reason humans scare people. Not because they're good at violence, but because they've managed to take their talent for violence and turn it into something else. They're not peaceful because they're weak. They're peaceful because they're so incredibly good at war that they've realized peace is more interesting. And the rough men standing ready? I asked. Are still there, Cathrix confirmed. Still ready, still rough, still willing to do violence on behalf of their civilization. But now they do something even more impressive. They stand ready so that others don't have to. They've turned their warrior ethos into a shield for peace, rather than a sword for war. He turned to face me directly. That's why you're taking over my position next cycle. Because understanding humans isn't just about analyzing their capabilities or studying their culture. It's about understanding this fundamental paradox. They're a species that mastered war so completely that they were able to choose peace without fear. And that, young one, makes them the most dangerous and the most valuable allies we could possibly have. I looked down at Earth one last time, watching the patrol ships move through their eternal dance. I think I understand now, I said slowly. They're not just rough men standing ready to do violence. They're rough men standing ready to prevent it. Exactly, Cathrix said softly, and that's why we sleep peacefully in our beds at night. Because humanity's rough men and women are standing ready, not just for them, but for all of us. The human ships below continued their patrol, silent guardians of a peace built on the paradox of warriors who chose to create rather than destroy, but never forgot how to do either. 3 days after my conversation with Ambassador Cathrix, I discovered exactly what he meant about humanity's warrior ethos. And ironically, it had nothing to do with warfare at all. I was reviewing trade manifestos in my new office aboard the USC Resolution, when the emergency alerts began blaring. Red warning lights pulsed through the normally serene diplomatic quarters, and the ship's AI made an announcement that chilled my hemolymph. Attention all personnel. Category 1 stellar event detected. Coronal mass ejection from Sol, magnitude exceeding known historical records. Impact with Earth's magnetosphere predicted in 47 minutes. This is not a drill. All non-essential personnel report to designated shelter areas immediately. My antennae went rigid with shock. A Category 1 stellar event was the kind of thing that ended civilizations. Even with Earth's impressive defensive technology, a direct hit from a super CME could fry every electronic system on the planet. Billions would die in the cascade of infrastructure failures that would follow. I rushed to the observation deck, expecting to see panic. Instead, I found organized precision that bordered on choreography. Human ships were already moving into position, forming a vast grid pattern between their sun and their homeworld. Civilian vessels were being efficiently evacuated to the dark side of the moon, while orbital stations began powering down non-essential systems. Impressive, isn't it? I turned to find Admiral Chen standing beside me. The human officer had a reputation for appearing exactly where she was needed, exactly when she was needed. Like most senior human military personnel, she carried herself with that peculiar mix of relaxed alertness that I was beginning to recognize as their warrior heritage expressing itself. They're not panicking, I observed. Why would they? Chen smiled, though her eyes never left the tactical display. This is what we train for. Did you know that Earth's military runs planetary defense drills every 3 months? Not just for military threats, for everything. Solar flares, asteroid impacts, gamma-ray bursts. But this isn't a drill, I protested. This is an extinction-level event. Maybe, Chen shrugged. But those rough men and women Catherics told you about? They don't just stand ready for war. They stand ready for everything. As if to emphasize her point, the tactical display lit up with new information. The human ships had arranged themselves into what they called a defense-in-depth formation. Layered lines of vessels stretching out toward the sun. What are they doing? I asked, noticing that many of the ships were civilian vessels that had been rapidly retrofitted with military-grade shields. Remember how Cathrix told you we build civilization to support our warriors? Well, we also build our warriors to support our civilization. Chen's smile turned predatory. Those ships are going to form a distributed electromagnetic shield. Each vessel will take a portion of the CME's impact, dispersing the energy across the entire fleet rather than letting it hit Earth's magnetosphere all at once. But that's suicide, I stammered. Even with military-grade shielding, the ships in the front lines will be doing exactly what they signed up for, Chen interrupted firmly. Protecting their people, different enemy, same principle. I watched in fascination as the human vessels locked into their final positions. The civilian ships had been transformed into impromptu defensive platforms, their shields modified and linked together in a pattern I'd never seen before. How did they adapt their ships so quickly? Because we planned for it, Chen said simply. Every civilian vessel in the Sol system is built with military-grade hardpoints and shield generators. They're just usually powered down to save energy. We can activate and retrofit an entire civilian fleet for defensive operations in under an hour. But why? The cost must be enormous. Less than the cost of not being ready. Chen checked her timepiece. 20 minutes to impact. You should head to the shelter area. I started to protest, but she fixed me with a look that somehow managed to be both kind and unyielding. This isn't about bravery, Ambassador. This is about letting the rough men and women do their jobs without worrying about protecting diplomats. As I made my way to the shelter, I couldn't help but think about what Cathrix had said about humans building civilization to support their warriors. But he'd had it slightly wrong. They hadn't just built civilization to support warriors. They'd built warriors to support civilization. Every aspect of their society, from their military to their civilian infrastructure, was designed with one purpose: to stand ready. The impact, when it came, was both more and less terrible than I'd imagined. From the shelter's monitors, I watched as the coronal mass ejection, a vast serpent of plasma and magnetic energy, slammed into the human defense grid. The front line of ships lit up like artificial suns as their shields absorbed and dispersed the energy. Some of them went dark immediately, their crews sacrificing their vessels' power systems to absorb just a little more of the impact. But the second line held, and the third. Each layer of ships took some of the fury out of the solar storm, dispersing it, channeling it, fighting it not with weapons, but with the same implacable determination that had once caused them to build cities around their armies. When it was over, 47 human vessels were completely disabled. 96 more had suffered severe damage. But Earth's magnetosphere had held. Their civilization had survived. I found Admiral Chen in the aftermath, overseeing rescue operations for the disabled vessels. Why? I asked simply. She knew what I meant. Because that's what we do, we stand ready. But this wasn't war, I pressed. This wasn't even an enemy you could fight. Wasn't it? She turned to face me fully. You're thinking like a diplomat again. To us, anything that threatens our people is an enemy. Whether it's a hostile fleet, a solar flare, or a natural disaster. The principles don't change, just the tactics. She gestured to the rescue ships darting between the damaged vessels. Those rough men and women standing ready, they're not just warriors, they're guardians. And sometimes the thing they're guarding against isn't something you can fight with weapons. Sometimes it's the universe itself. I watched as human crews risked their lives to save their comrades, moving with the same disciplined precision they would have shown in battle. And finally, I understood what Cathrix had tried to tell me. Humans hadn't just created civilization to support their warriors. They'd created warriors who could support their civilization in all things. They'd taken their martial heritage and turned it toward not just defending against enemies, but defending against everything that threatened their people. The rough men and women stood ready not just for war, but for any challenge. They'd turned their warrior ethos into something greater, a shield against not just violence, but chaos itself. As I composed my first official report as ambassador, I included a line that I thought summed it up perfectly. Humanity's greatest achievement isn't that they learn to fight effectively. It's that they learn to defend effectively against anything. Their rough men and women stand ready not just for war, but for whatever challenge threatens their people. They don't just fight enemies. They fight chaos itself. And in doing so, they've become something unique in the galaxy. Warriors who defend not just against violence, but against the very entropy of the universe. Admiral Chen read my report before I sent it, and made only one correction. She added, "And they do it not because they have to, but because they chose to. That's what makes them truly remarkable. They're rough men and women who stand ready by choice, not necessity." I left the correction in. After all, she would know. She was one of them. My first year as ambassador brought many revelations about humanity, but none quite as surprising as what I learned during the Nexus pandemic. It wasn't their response to the crisis that shocked me. After witnessing their handling of the solar storm, I'd come to expect efficiency in emergencies. No, what amazed me was how they turned their warrior ethos toward healing. The Nexus virus emerged in the Capella sector, a highly adaptive pathogen that could infect nearly any carbon-based life form. By the time it reached USC space, 14 species had already reported infections. The Unified Species Council was paralyzed with indecision, each member race advocating for different approaches based on their own medical traditions. That's when humanity did something unprecedented. They volunteered their entire medical research infrastructure as a unified response force. "I don't understand," I admitted to Dr. Sarah Martinez, Earth's chief xenopathologist, as we watched research teams deploy from the newly commissioned hospital ship HMHS Nightingale. "This isn't your fight. The virus hasn't even reached human space yet." Martinez gave me that peculiar human expression, half smile, half grimace, that I'd come to recognize as their "you're missing the point" face. "Remember what you learned about how humans approach threats?" she asked, checking supply manifests on her datapad. "This is no different. The virus is an enemy. We're mounting a defense. The fact that it hasn't reached us yet just means we have time to prepare a proper welcome party." I watched as teams of human medical personnel boarded ships bound for various infected worlds. Each team carried what they called battle kits, comprehensive medical stations that could be deployed in minutes. "But you're risking your own people," I protested, "sending them directly into infected zones." "Of course we are," Martinez interrupted. "Those rough men and women standing ready? Some of them carry scalpels instead of rifles. Different weapons, same principle." She pulled up a holographic display showing the virus's spread pattern. "Look at it like a tactical map. The virus is the invading force. Each outbreak is a beachhead. We're not just sending doctors, we're sending medical strike teams. Each team is trained in what we call aggressive epidemiology." "You make it sound like a military operation." "Because it is." Martinez's eyes never left the display. "We learned a long time ago that fighting disease isn't that different from fighting any other enemy. You need intelligence gathering, rapid response teams, supply lines, and most importantly, a warrior's mindset." She gestured to a group of human medical personnel running combat-style drills with their equipment. "See them? Every one of them is trained in military protocols. Not because they're soldiers, but because military organizational structure is incredibly efficient for emergency response. They move like a strike team because, in essence, that's what they are." I watched as the medical teams practiced deploying their equipment, their movements precise and coordinated in a way that did indeed remind me of military exercises. "But this isn't combat," I said. "You can't shoot a virus." Martinez laughed. "No, but you can hunt it, track it, understand its tactics and counter them. The principle is the same. Identify the threat, contain it, eliminate it. Whether you're using bullets or antibodies doesn't change the fundamental approach." Over the next few weeks, I watched humanity's medical warriors in action. They deployed to infected worlds with military precision, setting up treatment centers that operated with the efficiency of forward operating bases. They approached each outbreak like a tactical problem, using terms like containment zones and vector elimination that blurred the line between medicine and warfare. But it was more than just terminology. They brought their warrior ethos to healing itself. When conventional treatments failed, they adapted with the same aggressive innovation they showed in combat. When supply lines were threatened, they improvised with the resourcefulness of soldiers behind enemy lines. When other species' medical traditions clashed with their methods, they demonstrated the same diplomatic flexibility they used in military alliances. "You've militarized medicine," I observed to Martinez one day as we reviewed progress reports. No, she corrected. We've applied warrior principles to healing. There's a difference. We're not fighting people. We're fighting death itself. And we fight it with the same determination we'd use against any other enemy. She showed me a report from one of the hardest-hit worlds. Human medical teams had worked for 72 hours straight, rotating in combat-style shifts to save an entire Mirian colony. When their supplies ran low, they improvised medical equipment from local materials. When traditional quarantine methods failed, they developed new protocols on the fly. This isn't just about treating the sick, Martinez explained. It's about standing ready. Those rough men and women Kethrix told you about? Some of them fight with medicine. Some fight with research. Some fight by developing new treatments or organizing supply chains. But they're all warriors in their own way. The turning point came 3 months into the pandemic. A human research team, working with data gathered by their medical strike teams, identified the virus's weakness. Within hours, their military-style communication network had distributed the information to every treatment center in infected space. Within days, they had developed a treatment protocol that could be adapted for every affected species. How? I asked Martinez, as we watched the infection rates finally begin to drop. How did you develop a solution so quickly? Because we approached it like warriors, she said simply. We didn't just study the virus. We hunted it. We didn't just treat it. We fought it. Every researcher, every doctor, every nurse approached their role like they were soldiers in a war. Because that's what we do. We stand ready, whether the enemy is an army, a solar flare, or a microscopic killer. As the pandemic waned, I found myself revising my understanding of humanity's warrior nature yet again. Their rough men and women didn't just stand ready with weapons or shields. They stood ready with healing hands, research minds, and an unwavering determination to protect life in all its forms. In my final report on the Nexus pandemic, I wrote, humanity's warrior ethos extends far beyond traditional combat. They fight disease with the same determination they fight military threats. Their medical personnel demonstrate the same courage, discipline, and tactical thinking as their soldiers. In doing so, they've created something unprecedented. Warriors of healing, who stand ready not just to fight death, but to defend life itself. Dr. Martinez read my report and added her own note. The most important battles aren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes they're fought with microscopes and medicine. But the warrior spirit, the willingness to stand ready, to fight against overwhelming odds, to defend those who cannot defend themselves, remains the same. As I watched the last of the human medical teams return from their deployments, I understood that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their ability to fight or heal or defend. It was their ability to apply their warrior spirit to any challenge, to stand ready not just for war, but for any threat to life and civilization. They were indeed rough men and women standing ready, not just to do violence, but to do whatever was necessary to protect and preserve life itself. If you had told me at the start of my ambassadorship that I would witness humanity's warrior spirit expressed through an arts and culture crisis, I would have dismissed the idea as absurd. Yet that's exactly what happened during the great cultural collapse of the Harmonious Collective. The Harmonious Collective, one of the oldest civilizations in known space, faced an unprecedented crisis when their quantum data archives began to degrade. Centuries of art, music, literature, and cultural heritage were disappearing, bit by quantum bit. Their entire civilization's cultural memory was literally dissolving. I was present at the emergency USC session when the collective's representatives made their desperate plea for help. Most species offered technical assistance, computational resources, or diplomatic support. The humans, characteristically, had a different approach. We're deploying the Cultural Preservation Corps, announced Dr. James Chen, Earth's Minister of Arts and Heritage. First wave teams are already mobilizing. The what? The collective's chief archivist's translation matrix struggled with the term. I wasn't surprised by their confusion. In my time studying humanity, I'd never heard of this organization. As if reading my thoughts, Admiral Chen, no relation to the minister, leaned over and whispered, "Watch. This is where it gets interesting." Within hours, massive human vessels began appearing in orbit around the collective's primary worlds. But these weren't warships. They were something called Cultural Recovery and Emergency Preservation Ships, CREPs. Each one was essentially a mobile museum, library, and arts center combined with a state-of-the-art data preservation facility. You militarized cultural preservation? I asked Dr. Chen as we toured the CREP's Menemozany. We prefer to say we applied warrior principles to cultural defense, he corrected. leading me through corridors filled with teams of artists, historians, and data specialists preparing for deployment. After all, what is culture if not the memory of a civilization? And what are warriors, if not defenders of what makes their civilization worth preserving? The scene before me was remarkably similar to what I'd witnessed during both the solar storm and the Nexus pandemic. Teams moved with military precision, but instead of weapons or medical equipment, they carried data preservation tools, recording devices, and artistic implements. Each team is trained in what we call rapid cultural preservation, Dr. Chen explained. They can deploy anywhere in the galaxy within 48 hours, set up a full preservation operation, and begin capturing and preserving cultural artifacts immediately. I watched as a team practiced their deployment routine. They moved like a military unit, but their objective was to preserve art, not take territory. Each member had a specific role. Some documented physical artifacts, others recorded oral histories, while still others worked to stabilize and transfer degrading data. But why maintain such a force? I asked. Cultural preservation is usually a scholarly pursuit, not a military-style operation. Dr. Chen's expression turned serious. Because we learned the hard way that losing your culture is just as devastating as losing a war. Those rough men and women standing ready? Some of them stand ready to preserve the very soul of civilization itself. He showed me their operations center, where teams coordinated their efforts with military-grade precision. Look at it like a battlefield. The enemy is time itself. Every piece of art, every song, every story we save is a victory. Every cultural tradition we preserve is territory held against the advance of oblivion. The humans approached the collective's crisis with the same intensity they brought to military operations. They established cultural preservation zones like defensive perimeters. They deployed mimetic preservation teams like special forces units. They even used military-style logistics to coordinate the massive data transfer operations. But it was more than just organization. They brought their warrior spirit to the task itself. When conventional preservation methods failed, they innovated new ones with battlefield creativity. When faced with seemingly irretrievable data, they attacked the problem with the tenacity of soldiers refusing to concede ground. Watch this, Dr. Chen said one day, pointing to a team working with a particularly degraded data core. The team had been working for 36 hours straight, using every technique they knew to extract what remained of a collection of ancient collective poetry. Standard recovery methods have failed, the team leader reported, switching to aggressive extraction protocols. I expected them to give up. Instead, they double-downed, bringing in specialized equipment and experts from 3 different fields. They approached the problem like a military objective. No retreat, no surrender. Just increasingly creative solutions until they achieved their goal. Got it, the team leader finally announced. The relief in the room was palpable. They had saved tens of thousands of poems that had existed for millennia. Why? I asked Dr. Chen. Why put so much effort into saving another species' poetry? Because that's what warriors do, he replied simply. They defend what's precious. Sometimes that's lives. Sometimes that's territory. And sometimes it's the accumulated wisdom and beauty of an ancient civilization. As I watched the humans work, I began to understand yet another dimension of their warrior nature. They didn't just fight to preserve life or territory. They fought to preserve the things that made life worth living. Their rough men and women stood ready not just to defend against physical threats, but against the loss of memory, beauty, and meaning itself. The collective's crisis was eventually resolved. Through a combination of human determination, multi-species cooperation, and some creative applications of quantum mechanics, most of their cultural heritage was preserved. But the experience left an indelible mark on galactic society. In my report on the incident, I wrote, "Humanity's warrior ethos extends even to the preservation of art and culture. They approach cultural preservation with the same discipline, determination, and tactical thinking they bring to military operations. Their cultural preservation core demonstrates that their rough men and women stand ready not just to defend life and territory, but to preserve the very essence of civilization itself." Dr. Chen added his own note to my report. In the end, what are warriors protecting if not their culture? The art, music, stories, and traditions that make us who we are. These are worth fighting for just as much as any physical territory. The rough men and women who stand ready to preserve culture are warriors in the truest sense, fighting against the entropy of memory itself. As I watched the Cultural Preservation Corps begin to wind down their operations, I realized that humanity's warrior spirit was even more versatile than I had imagined. They didn't just stand ready to fight enemies or heal the sick or defend against natural disasters. They stood ready to preserve the very things that made civilization worth defending in the first place. They were truly rough men and women standing ready, not just to do violence, but to do whatever was necessary to protect and preserve every aspect of civilization, from its physical existence to its cultural soul.